Drafting, reviewing, editing documents. It's one of those things that seems so simple that there's no point spending any time thinking about how to do it. However, in my experience, not thinking about it costs more time in the long run. And in this video, I'll outline some of the techniques I've discovered to ease the document creation and reviewing process. Hello, my name is Zach Parsons, and I have over 10 years experience helping teams like yours reduce time waste and uncertainty. And specifically for this video, for about 3 years, I was the final stage reviewer of donor proposals and reports that accounted for about 80% of a charity's income. And this gives me a bunch of experience in the process involved in creating and reviewing high stakes documents. The first tip I have is to be clear on what the document is. Now, if there is confusion in the request, there's going to be confusion with the result. In an ideal world, the brief would be in writing. I find that writing something down forces you to think through what you're asking for and gives everyone something to reference during the drafting and reviewing stages. I do realize that this might not always be possible, and sometimes you have to request something verbally. In those cases, one of the things I found helpful is to say to the person who you're making the request to, could you just summarize what I've asked for? Like, I'm sure that you know what you're doing. However, I just want to make sure that I've explained it properly. Another great way I found to check for understanding and alignment is to ask for a rough outline. And this is where the initial drafter writes out the headings and puts some notes or bullets under each of what they're going to cover under each heading. This I've found has been a light touch way to enable discussions about content before lots of time gets spent sweating over the prose of each section. If you are creating a lot of the same type of document, for example, proposals or reports like I was, you might find it useful to create some guidance on what good looks like for said document. And one thing I want to be really clear about is that it is your responsibility, or is the responsibility of the requester, to communicate the brief effectively. Or at least when I was the person requesting documents, I felt that it was my responsibility to be the one that's communicating what I need effectively. If you're finding that people aren't doing what you've asked for, and they're doing that regularly, it's probably because you don't know how to ask for it properly. My next tip is to be clear on the type of review that's happening. Now, there's nothing worse than asking for one type of review and getting another type of review in return. So, for example, asking for a high-level steer on content and then getting a really detailed track changes and loads of comments on prose, word choice, formatting, and the like. So what I would recommend is that when you're asking for a review, you should specify what type of review that you need. And if you're being the one that's being asked for a review, or to put that another way, if you're being asked to review something, then I would recommend clarifying if you're not sure, or if the requester has not actually specified at all, and then be well behaved and do the type of review that's needed at that stage in the document creation process. My next tip is to avoid live reviewing. And just so there's no confusion, what I mean by that is live reviewing is where a reviewer hasn't seen a document in advance and gives verbal feedback to the drafter as they're reading it for the first time. My biggest issue with this method is that the reviewer is only ever able to give their knee-jerk hot take as they go through the document. I personally have regularly found myself putting comments in a document and then having to delete said comments because my concern is addressed in the same document. Now, had I been live reviewing, I would have said the comment to the drafter and then had egg on my face immediately when the drafter tells me that it's covered somewhere else in the document. I found that the best reviews that I've done are the reviews where I've had the ability to read the whole document at least once before putting any comments in. And now, practically speaking, I do just want to say that I will sometimes put in a comment or two during the first pass, but that's usually only where I worry that I'll forget something during the proper review. I also like to have the flexibility to quickly double check something, potentially like a quick fact check or a comparison to what I've said in a previous document. I find that this is especially important for maintaining consistency as a reviewer across documents. I don't want to be saying one thing one week and then something else another week. My other big gripe with live reviewing is that it takes substantially more staff time to do. And this is like just easy maths, but basically, if you're giving feedback directly, you're already doubling how long it takes. Or if you're, I should say, if you're giving feedback live, it doubles how long it takes. So if it takes you 1 hour to review a document, that's 1 hour of staff time. If it takes you 1 hour to review a document with someone else sat there, that's 2 hours of staff time, literally double the time. So, and then on top of that, above the just literal straight doubling of time, in my experience, I found that it actually then takes more rounds of reviewing, because with the live reviews, the quality of each review is lower. And then that makes the quality of each redraft lower. So you have to go through the cycle more times to get the document up to the standard that you need it to be. Now, last thing on this point, I swear, promise, is that it's an unfortunate truth that some people will sometimes wildly just miss the mark on the work that they produce. And no matter how good your poker face is, it's really not nice on the drafter to see your "this sucks" face. So to save them the pain of doing that, and again, might be a personal thing, but I know that if I'm in that position, I would like a couple of minutes to like compose myself and think about the feedback that I'm going to give to the drafter so that it's constructive and so that it doesn't like break their spirit by just seeing my hot take knee-jerk reaction of "this is wildly missed the mark." The other thing, just as an aside, I promise this is the actual last thing, is that when I review documents, any document, if I'm concentrating on it, I will often like furrow my brow. So I'm going to look annoyed with the document regardless. So that's just not fair on the drafter to see. My next tip is to have one person reviewing at any given time. So what I do is I try to avoid more than one person reviewing at any given time, else it just gets messy. And even in situations where reviews do need to be done concurrently because of time, I still prefer each reviewer to review in different versions of the same document. And the reason I want that to happen is that it avoids existing reviewers biasing new reviewers' comments, and it reduces the likelihood of the dreaded comment debate. My next tip is to be clear on which version needs to be reviewed. Now, there is nothing worse than a review being done on the wrong version of the document, and that's true for everyone involved, both drafter and reviewer. This can be solved with clear version control and or naming conventions. My next tip is autosave and cloud storage. Now, genuinely, I've recently heard of people losing days and even weeks of work by not saving and backing up. So I can't believe that this is still a tip in 2025, but here we are. My next tip is to use built-in style sets. Now, let me give a quick explanation in case you're unfamiliar with what a style set is. Now, you can apply a style to text in a document, and if you change the formatting of the style set, it'll change all the text in the document with that style set applied. Now, this is often used for headers, but it has a range of other use cases, which I'm not going to go into in this video. But the way that it's going to save your team time is by enabling the person responsible for formatting to quickly apply visual branding guidelines at the end of the document's creation cycle if it's not already in said guidelines. And as a bonus tip, if you're going to use Word and you want numbered headings, you should apply the numbering to the style, not directly to the heading. My next tip is to not focus on branding in the early stages, and maybe not even at all. Now, in the early stages of document creation, it's way more important to focus on the content and the use of style sets than it is to get the right branding. Most people have really no idea, or they just really don't care what a hex code is, and they wouldn't know where to start when it comes to changing things like line spacing. And often what happens when people do try and follow a visual style guide, they don't apply it to the style set. Instead, what they do is they apply it directly to the text, and then this overrides the style set, making it painful later on in the editing process. What I find when asking people to write documents is that it's way more effective to get them to focus on getting the content right and to only use the preset style sets, and to get them to just completely ignore branding the document. If they try to do it, and then do it incorrectly, what can be a 5-minute job can turn into a 2 or 3 hour job when you have to go through and reapply all of the correct branding visual guidelines to all of the text in a document. Now, I would even go as far to say that internal documents don't need to be branded really at all. Like, do I want someone spending time trying to figure out what shade of blue to use, or do I want them to add actual value by creating good, solid content in the documents that they're creating? Now, of course, what you can do is apply style sets at an organizational level so that all new documents are created with the right style sets from the offset. Or you could do the next tip, which is to use templates. And I know this advice is as old as time, but sometimes it's worth just repeating advice that's as old as time. So you can either use templates for the adherence to visual branding, which is what we were talking about in the previous tip, or what you can do is you can use it for adherence to or guidance for content within a particular type of document. My next tip is to introduce an editorial style guide. Now, when I first started reviewing documents as the main part of my job, I found myself repeating the same conversations about writing conventions, and to be honest, I just got tired of them. So over time, what I did is I built an editorial style guide to outline the decisions that we'd made about how to handle conventions like the Oxford comma. And it made my life substantially easier as I wasn't having to constantly reset expectations. And this was especially true for new members of staff who come in with preset conceptions about what conventions for writing should be. Now, if you want, you can put in the comments below whether you think I'm for or against the Oxford comma, if that'll give you kicks. I feel like just talking about the Oxford comma gives you some clues, but I've probably biased you, which is unfair. I also worry about inviting people to comment on my weird quirks, but there you go. And my last tip is to use the right software for the job. Now, for almost all things that contain words, you kind of want to start in a word processor. And when I say it like that, it sounds so simple, but it's so easy to forget. I personally think it gives way more flexibility for getting the content right first. It gives way more flexibility for things like track changes and comments. And then you can move on to other software to fine tune the presentation. I find that a lot of people forget the end software and the beginning software mixed up, and they think that they need to start in the software that they're going to end in. So for example, they think that they're going to do all of the formatting and presentation work in PowerPoint, so they start in PowerPoint, and actually instead it should start in a word processor. Like, as an aside, like, I don't even start presentations in PowerPoint, which is what PowerPoint is made for. I figure out the outline in Word first, and then I move that to PowerPoint when I've figured it all out, because Word is way more flexible for copying and pasting and quickly writing things and quickly deleting things. PowerPoint is great when you already have a plan. It's not great for creating a plan. And there you have it, 11 ways that I've found to save time when creating and reviewing documents. I'm going to put a couple of videos on screen now, which the YouTube algorithm thinks that you might like to see. Have I missed any? If I have, then put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.